So we're going to close the day out with our final panel session. This will be your last chance. You can scan the QR code and pop some questions in there, and we'll try to get them answered as we go through. And while we might just stand up, I'll get you to stand up if you're able to, just because we've been sitting for a little while. And while you do that, I'll introduce our panellists. Welcome back to the stage Tenielle Jordan and Associate Professor Judith Lacey. Come on up. I would also like to introduce Kirsten Pilatti, the Chief Executive Officer of the Breast Cancer Network Australia. And Kirsten, or KP, as many of us know her as. Give Kirsten a round of applause. She was recognised for her leadership last year when she was appointed to the Health Minister's HTA Assessment Review Implementation Advisory Group. And please give a round of applause for Adjunct Associate Professor Jo Watson, the Deputy Chair of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee. She's in charge of the Consumer Evidence Unit. Okay, everyone sit down, thank you. And Jo's contributed to health policy reform for many decades, including national and international projects. So I'll come and sit over here. So don't forget, you can be popping your questions in Slido, or I've got lots to ask as well. So throughout the day, we've heard about a lot of progress, but we've also heard about that there are opportunities to improve equity and opportunities so that no one is left behind. So this panel is called From the Ward to the Board, Let's Make It Personal. And we've heard a lot today about the power of lived experience. And this session is all about action, how we move from collaboration and consultation into true partnership, and how every voice in the room can drive change. So I wanted to ask each of the panellists to start, when it comes to cancer care, how well do each of you feel that the patient voice is represented in the decision-making level, whether that's in a clinic or at the systems level? So can we start with you, Tenielle?
Yeah. I think it's a really complex one because, as I touched on in my speech, when you first enter the cancer world, you don't, unless you have a medical background, you don't know anything. So you don't know the questions to ask. And I think in that sense, and my first time round having cancer, I really relied on my medical team to help me with the questions I should be asking. And I think we do need partnership in that for people to say, think about this, maybe consider this, and make offers even if it's not standard practice. I think this time round, as I live with it and I try to integrate living with cancer into my life and hopefully living for the long term, I do feel more involved. It's quite a challenge for me to be, I feel a bit pushy and I feel a bit mouthy sometimes, and it is a real challenge for me. But I feel like now I have more of that partnership to say, guys, we need to make this work for me because it's for the long term. And so, yeah, I think when people are new, we do need more of that support to ask the right questions.
And Judith, what about from where you see, how well do you think the patient voice has a role when people come to
No, I think it's quite mixed. It is mixed. It's mixed across different centres, it's mixed across different services, and within the hospital, it's mixed again. So we, in the supportive oncology space, introduced patient-reported outcome measures and have used them in our service for 10 years. And those that use them, it helps us to capture the patient's voice. And we use what's called the Edmonton Symptom Assessment Score, what are your symptoms, but also something called the MyCore, measure your concerns and wellbeing. What are the two main reasons, your two main concerns that you're seeing us today, and how do you score them? And so integrating that, I feel we, as a service that focuses on patient wellbeing, are capturing the voice well, but we don't see everybody. And I hear from so many patients that their voices aren't heard, or they're intimidated by the consultation. They just want to stay on treatment. They'll underplay their symptoms. And so I think that it's mixed, and I think we can do it better.
Kirsten, what about from what you see, either from a clinic level or on a systems level?
I think we've seen a huge improvement, and that is, we've seen in the room so many consumer advocates. What I think is we've still got work to do is actually the framework of understanding what type of consumer engagement we need which different parts. And, you know, there's a big difference between someone sharing their lived experience, which absolutely has impact and is powerful, as it is to being consumer representatives, which need to be able to see the whole picture to be able to create change. And I think that's really the work we now have to do as a whole health sector. At what point do we do co-design with a lived experience versus asking consumer advocates to be at the table who can be more representative with that single voice? So we've got a long way to go. What I do kind of think we have to celebrate is that there are many more consumers at the table where decisions are being made. We've got to, you know, in all good management, you highlight what's working well and then you give an additional step of what still needs to be done. And so I think there is lots of hospital settings who are really understanding the importance of the patient experience and the patient voice. And now it is really understanding how that whole consumer engagement framework works and how we deliver better care because of it.
And Jo, from your perspective, more of the systems level and the work that you do, how well are we embedding the patient voice into that decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Kirsten said, it's an evolving story. I think we've come from a fairly low base. You know, I first entered this sort of sphere around 2002 and, you know, it was pretty light on back then. What we've got now is definitely the richer for the diversity of different groups and at different points intersecting with either the system itself or through the committee processes. I think it's ongoing improvement, though, that is really the story. And as we've heard today, I don't think anyone challenges the notion that the patient voice matters and it's critical. Patient-centric, patient-embedded, all the terms that you hear are absolutely recognised now, and that was very different, you know, 20 years ago. I think the challenge now is, and to the previous speaker's point, why are we asking? What do we want the voice for? Where is it best placed and positioned? And what is it that's going to be meaningful and not asking for the sake of it or being tokenistic or not adding value? And if we can get serious about the notion of patient evidence being developed to be utilised appropriately at the right point, that I think will elevate it to another level.
Thank you, Jo. And Tenielle, I might just go back to you. You've spoken about how patients sometimes are they want to be seen as a good patient and they don't advocate for themselves. What have you learnt about the benefits of speaking up or how to do it, and what do you think needs to change so that people with cancer don't have to carry that burden of advocacy alone?
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned along the way is that probably you're never as pushy as you think you are. If you're the sort of person like me that's worried about being pushy, you're probably fine. You know, you're just having a normal level of asking questions. But I think I've learned this so often when I've said something and I've apologised or I've said, I'm sorry, I'm being pushy, the response is often, we'd rather know.
Yes.
And you do sort of realise it's for so many of our healthcare team, they want to know how you're feeling. They don't want you to suffer in silence, because if they don't know, then they can't fix it and they can't help you. And so I think it is, I know a lot of people probably don't want to spend a lot of time in the system, because if you're spending a lot of time in the system, it means you're sick for a long time. But I think for those of us that are, it is about building that relationship of trust, and it takes time. But again, it is also, I think, a little bit incumbent, and my care team do this exceptionally, but a bit incumbent on the healthcare professionals to look at you as a person, not just a person with bowel cancer, and say, I know Tenielle, I know this is how she is, so I'm going to treat her in this way. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Judith, just from a clinician's point of view, how can health professionals create space for patients' voices from the start, rather than relying on people with cancer to have to fight for the right to speak up?
So I think, and we heard Tracy O'Brien talk today about the importance of patient-reported outcome measures and patient experience measures. They should be a part of standard of care. We've got the experience, and I've learned from others around the world, that it makes a difference for people to actually, before they enter an appointment, to score what their symptoms are, what their concerns are, so that when they're in the consultation, that can be embedded directly into the electronic medical record, so that you know why somebody is there, and it's a starting point for a conversation. But you also need to create a culture where it's totally acceptable and invited to tell people, what you're experiencing, and to train people in the communication skills that they need to be able to get information and make people feel comfortable to talk about their selves, their symptoms, and what matters to them most. And it's a part of the art of medicine, isn't it?
I would really like to see health professionals referring to organisations like Rare Cancer Australia, like us, much, much earlier. We can actually help to build the foundational information that is essential for patients, not to be seen as call if you need, here's some helpful information, but actually be referring really early in, so we can provide that base information, so when they come to the health professional, they've already got the questions that are important to them. They're already learning through the peer support programs that we all offer. So we really are then working at the top of scale. So people are getting the right answers to the questions that they need from health professionals. And I really hope that that's where we get to on this navigational investment, that we're sending people to the right place to provide the right information, so we're all working at the top of our game.
Thanks, Kirsten. And look, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on today was action and seeing meaningful change. And you have led, and the Breast Cancer Network Australia has really led the charge on securing national data for metastatic breast cancer. And I wanted you to share with the audience, why does that data matter so much, and what lessons can other people take in the room from how you actually turned the advocacy into real systems change, so that now that data is captured?
I think the first thing I would say is everyone agrees that data matters, and that's why lots of people are working on data framework. Why data matters is where we actually need to focus, and that is because it holds the system, it holds organisations like us to account for the people that we are here to represent, and that is around the account of providing care. Because that's what we ultimately want. We want people to come out the other end, to continue living well, to exactly everything that you talked about, Judith. And that's why data matters. It's because unless you have that number to be able to refer back to, it's very difficult for us to set up the services and systems. And really, the thing that I kind of reflect on, the very first roundtable of kind of shouldn't we be knowing this number for breast cancer happened in, and I had to write it down because it's all happened very fast, but for a system that's pretty slow. So July 22, a room full of consumers and BCNA people who said this is not good enough. We have been actually advocating for this for decades. In 1998, when we wrote the report for what were the gaps in services, we knew data mattered then. So decades, we couldn't find a solution. And the thing that I think reflect back on is what was it that happened in that room?
Yeah, what was the catalyst that really, the playbook and the steps that happened so that you weren't just talking about it, but actually something changed?
The thing that changed was, how are we going to make this happen, not what are the problems? So being completely solution-focused, and then bringing the right people into the room to say, what is it? And I loved what we did before with Tori. What is your commitment that you're going to make? And we had a room of people who all could make one small commitment and then go away and deliver on that commitment to be able to start to see change. Because unless people feel a momentum, they're not going to commit to it. So I would say that when we all spent our time writing down the lesson that we can take in the metastatic data, which will help every single cancer patient. This is not something that's going to stop at breast cancer, but now we can find the models that will actually mean we can flow it out and be able to count every single person living with stage 4. And we can count the living, not count the dead, is that everyone became champions for change and everyone had a small piece of the puzzle that they needed to commit to bring about change. It's not solved, but we can all feel proud on the reflective role that we take. So instead of everyone pointing the fingers about what someone else needs to do, turn the mirror on yourself and go, what is it that I can do today? What's the one small thing I can do to bring about change? And that is where real momentum shift happens.
Yes, and that's definitely what we want everyone in this room thinking about as well. So Jo, thanks Kirsten, thanks for sharing that. Jo, you sit on the PBAC and the Consumer Evidence Unit, and I wanted to ask, how do you balance, we've heard some really powerful individual stories today of patients and carers. How do you balance hearing those stories with the population evidence that committees look at? How do you balance those two things when you come to make decisions?
So I think it's about integration. I think the patient voice, the experience and the narrative brings a humanity to complement your clinical and your economic data. The data sets, the evidence base that's brought before evaluations and assessment committees. But I think there's a humanity and a story that can be much deeper if it's given a framework for then being able to be brought into a population data set. And as we've heard today, there's diversity of experiences, there's diversity of populations, and there needs to be a way that a system can hear and respect individual voices while at the same time understanding better the populations and communities from which those voices come. Otherwise, we've got an imbalance, and I think the imbalance leaves gaps or deficits in understanding. I think it leaves gaps in submissions that are brought forward by sponsors. It leaves gaps in the way that we can utilise data and evidence before us. And clearly even the blunt way that we try and collect patient inputs today leaves a lot of unknowns and a lot of question marks because it's a receptacle. It's a passive way of receiving as opposed to actually understanding what may be quite a diverse set of experiences. We rely on people to contribute. We don't actually have a way of, if you like, validating or testing further and wider. And again, as we heard in the previous presentation, that begs the question then in the Australian population, what is the mix and are we truly understanding the benefits and the values?
And so in the audience today we have a lot of patient advocates groups and I'm sure they'd be interested to find out what does good patient advocacy look like to embed lived experience and really do a good job of representing the lived experience when people are coming to put submissions into PBAC?
Yeah, well, I think good patient advocacy looks like anyone that's in this room and beyond. Good patient advocacy is genuine advocacy. Good patient advocacy is the raw, the unfiltered and the genuine, and it brings humanity. And no one can argue with something as profound as that. I think where it's focused or where it's delivered brings it more power. So a room like today is absolutely the appropriate place for the things you want to advocate for here today. Bringing them before a committee that's dealing with a particular framework of considerations is not going to be as powerful. It's not the optimal way to deliver your lobbying or your focus. Your patient advocacy at a point of a decision-making about a treatment needs to be very focused and fit for purpose about who you're targeting and what they can do for you. There are people in this place that can do things quite differently to those that sit in a department or sit on a decision-making committee. And as an old patient advocate myself, working that out probably gives you bigger bang for your buck.
So working out what individual powers different decision makers has, and bringing the best of your advocacy skills to that. So I just wanted to go back to you, TJ, to talk about living with cancer as a long-term status, working and carrying on with life. What do you feel the system needs to do to change to support people to live more fully, so that they're not just seen as cancer patients, but people who happen to have cancer but also do lots of other things as well?
Yeah, it's been a really tough one, and I think every patient in this room or every carer of a patient in this room knows that when you're in treatment, it feels like you have appointments every day or every second day, or you have, an appointment at 9 a.m. and then 5 p.m. and then 2 days later at 6 a.m. It just feels never-ending, and it's really hard to live a normal life when all of these appointments are interrupting. You have to be at the hospital, you have to be there all the time. For me, one, I have an exceptional employer who kind of treats me as a cancer patient as anyone with kids. And I'm not a parent, so please forgive me, but in the sense of you have kids, you need to leave to pick them up from school, you need to leave because they have sports day, something like that, but you ultimately get your work done. That's how I think you need to look at people who have cancer, to give them the opportunity to work. Not everyone who lives with cancer wants to work or can work, and that's also fine. But for me, it's something really important. I love my work, and it's what keeps me healthy. And so I think you do need healthcare providers to try and keep appointments close together, make it so you can create a routine. For me, I get treatment every second Monday at the exact same time, and it's just the extra appointments that fall out of the routine. And then it just lets you be a person living with cancer. I'm not dying imminently. I want to live for a long time, and to do that, I need to pay my mortgage. And so I need to be a full participant in society.
Amazing. So we've got about 4 minutes or so left. If you've got any questions, just pop them in Slido. Otherwise, I've wanted to, this is our last panel discussion of the day. And I wanted to just ask each of our panellists one final thing. If you could each make one change tomorrow to bring the patient voice closer to the centre of cancer care, what would that be? What would be the one change to really embed the patient voice into things? You want to start with Judith?
Well, I wouldn't mind starting by just seeing a raise of hands of who is currently a cancer patient having treatment. And how many of you have had treatment or on surveillance or caring for somebody? So there are quite a few people, and there are some hands and there are some less hands, but every person in this space needs to be heard and needs to have the best care possible, so that you can turn up here and sit here for an entire day listening and participating. So what I think needs to happen is we need to capture your voices and stand together and work out how to advocate to move things forward. And so if there's one thing that I would like everyone to have a personalised supportive care program from the time of diagnosis. It doesn't need to be hands-on, but I think we need to capture what you want and you need and work with us to develop the best program possible and use implementation research and co-design and have superb leaders in research, like our research manager here, Justine, working with us to build the best program possible for every person with a rare or less common cancer.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
I think being on the HTA implementation group, and I'm not sure if it was a poison chalice I was handed, but it has really given me a lot more knowledge and understanding much deeper into the system. And so I kind of think for consumers, what I would say is we need to walk into the door with the solutions, not the problems. For health professionals and researchers, I would say you must really consider the policy and the scale of your project well before you go to any consumer group and ask them to review it. You must understand the outcome early, and that will give us speed through through the HTA system. And to pharmaceutical companies and to all of us, I would say we need much more transparency. If we really want this change, we can all start making that change well before the Minister makes any final decisions, because we know that that's much bigger. But all of us have a chance to make things more transparent, to start the conversations much earlier, and we will see speed in the system much faster than just sitting back and waiting for someone else to solve the problem.
Jo, what would your last thoughts be?
RCA are leaders in this work alongside many others, including the one on my right. You're all more powerful in a coordinated way because you're all saying the same things. So don't underestimate the power of Voices Collective and the way that you can bring that to wherever you go.
That's a very good point. And I'll leave the last word to TJ.
Oh, goodness. I think it is help me and help your patients or all patients live the best they can while they're going through treatment, and whether that be help them understand the options available to them for care, for treatment, connect them with people who are going to help them alleviate side effects like Judith. I think it's just, I don't know how to navigate this system alone, and it is incumbent upon a lot of people to help patients do that. And so please just think about ways that you can do that instead of just falling into process.
Amazing. Give our panel a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.